So the use of excessive force is really endemic to the Chicago Police Department. We have a really big problem here in Chicago of use of excessive force, right? And that, I understand, is like being a euphemism. This is the language of the UN use. It's police violence, right? It's police crimes. And it's really terrible here in Chicago. And it's not just a few bad apples. It's something that, it's implicating thousands of officers, and the impunity with which it's occurring implicates the entire department. So I have another story. This was shared by someone named Christopher at our public hearing. So Christopher said, and so last year I flame up the blunt. They hit the sirens. I come out, put my hands behind my head, and get on the ground, get on the ground. Cool, I get on the ground. Next thing I know, I wake up in the back of a police station, and I don't even know what happened to me, to be honest with you. That's how bad they beat me. I guarantee you, I'm sitting in the Cook County Jail with 22 stitches in my tongue, 2 facial fractures, bruised ribs, scrapes all over my body. I still can't talk right to this day. I can't eat certain things. I had an orbital fracture, a nasal fracture, like, say, that had to stitch my tongue back together. I almost didn't have no tongue. Like, it was literally hanging on by a thread. I could feel it, like I could feel my tongue at my chin. Yeah, it's stuff that I shouldn't have done, but at the same time, I came out willingly. I came out with my hands up, giving myself in. There's no reason to use force like that. Now, I can't even go back and file reports or sue the police officer, get the badge numbers or nothing. Like, they scarred me out of my whole life. So all of these testimonies that I'm reading through, none of them have like had a sustained penalty where the person involved has gotten like compensation, right? So again, multiple article violations taking place here. Okay, so this is where things get a little bit complicated. So I'm going to talk through sort of 2 stories of data, pre-IPRA and post-IPRA. So before 2007, the Chicago Police Department was taking care of all complaints, right? So any complaint that was made was handled by the Internal Affairs Division of the CPD. And so what we found then is that Chicago had a lot of brutality complaints being made against it, and they had a shockingly low amount of those complaints leading to any kind of penalty. So we had only 0.48% of CPD brutality complaints were being sustained, and that this was actually 94% below the national average, right? So we know that we have a problem in the United States with police brutality and people getting away with it, and Chicago was like horrifically terrible and exceptional on that. So what ended up happening actually, and this is something that I learned after the report. The report, we had a very narrow amount of time to research and write that whole thing, and since then I've learned that IPRA was actually set up sort of as a response to people pushing back against this. Now, what has happened is, so IPRA is the Independent Police Review Authority, and they are tasked with handling all investigations of any shooting that happens. They also keep track of uses of tasers. And then they also deal with any complaints that have to do with excessive force, domestic violence, and verbal abuse. So any of those kinds of complaints are handled by IPRA. The rest, including things like sexual assault charges, are handled still by the CPD. What IPRA has done is it's magically moved that 0.48 up to a measly 1%. That's all, right? So still, we're not making this anywhere near sufficient progress. And you can see also, you're right, if you look at IPRA between 2011 and 2012, you have over 8,400, or you have 8,452 complaints being made, and only 105 are sustained. If you look at the most recent report that IPRA puts out of all of the sustained investigations, which is the only thing that they release, is the ones that are sustained, the first case is from, I think, 2005. That's not prompt, right? This is a complaint made in 2005 that just now was finally given a penalty. So we have this problem of excessive force taking place and with impunity. As I said, these numbers implicate the entire department, but I do want to highlight one really bad apple. I want to highlight Glenn Evans, who is featured here. So Glenn Evans, between 1988 and 2008, had over 45 excessive force complaints made against him, more than any other officer in that time period. Since then, he's had many dozens more complaints made against him. IPRA said that he should be fired. They recommended for his dismissal. That was ignored. He gets promoted. He's actually the commander of District 11. He's only recently been indicted for, I believe, 1 or 2 specific complaints. But folks in the room know many people who have been terrorized by this person for a really long time. Really awful person, commander of District 11. And the march that we have this evening, I really invite as many of you as possible to come out. It's at 6 p.m. in front of the District 11 Police Headquarters, and we're going to be calling him out, and also another data set that I'll be explaining in just a few minutes. The 662 worst officers as well, sort of protesting this violence and the impunity with which it's occurring. All right, so now I'm going to talk through deadly force. So there were a lot of numbers, especially because of ICRA, that help us understand the ways that deadly force is being used, specifically against people of color. And this is where you start to see especially black people, right? So black people are 10 times more likely to be shot by the police in Chicago than white people. If you look at between 2009 and 2013, over 75% of police shooting victims were black. Just this year alone, in the first 6 months of this year, 27 people were shot, 23 of them were black. Again, we have a problem of police shooting people throughout the country and in Chicago for sure, especially. And so in response to this, what people have done is they're like, well, why don't we give the cops tasers? That way, when they have to use force, it's not as deadly. And this is something even the UN suggested, the Committee Against Torture specifically suggested. And we're going to be saying, hey, that's not working, because what we're seeing here in Chicago is that the number of shootings hasn't gone down. Right? There's been no decrease in the number of shootings. Instead, we now have the added and disproportionate application of tasers against people of color. And so we have 92% of taser uses that have occurred between 2009 and 2011 are being used against black and Latino people. 49 of those are young people ages 8 to 16. We're using tasers on 8-year-olds. Like, that's absurd, right? Another thing, so by the way, in 2010, the CPD actually purchased 600 tasers and distributed them, right? So that's the numbers that we have start in 2010 for taser uses. The other thing, so here in 2014, if we look at just the first 6 months, there have been 186 uses of tasers by the Chicago police, and 146 of them were against black people. So 146 out of 186 times against black people. One of them was Dayton.